All right, here we go.
Cool.
Episode number 3.
Woo!
Welcome back, everybody.
Hello.
Kyle, don't do that. That's too loud.
What? Is it? Woo!
The woo's too loud. You're
It's the
you're peaking.
I'm peeking. I'm not peeking
Now
anywhere.
I have to restart.
Wow.
All right, welcome back, everybody.
I was instructed not to woo, so yay.
You can woo
No, I can't
softer.
Woo. No. Okay. Woo.
That's okay.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, the computer says
Okay.
that's fine.
Well, welcome back to History According to Hollywood, everybody. Woo. Woo.
All right.
Jesus.
Well,
Off to a great start tonight, guys.
so tonight's a pretty pivotal night.
Is it?
I'm gonna be a father within the next 24 to 48 hours.
24 to 72 hours.
72 hours, somewhere around there.
He's
We'll
just in
see.
denial about the 72 part.
I don't know. So, I mean, by the time this is released, all of that will have already passed.
Oh, yeah.
My son will be here,
Yes.
and I'll be more sleep deprived than I am now, but that's okay.
Which is hard to do.
We'll find a way. But anyway, so I'm gonna try to stay focused tonight.
Mm-hmm.
But if I seem even more ADD-like than normal, there's a reason.
You know, if we'd started this 3 months ago, we could have named this podcast Two Idiots and a Pregnant Woman, but, you know.
It would only be 3 episodes in,
Oh, yeah. True.
and then it's gonna be 2 idiots, a baby, and a no longer pregnant woman.
Two Idiots and a Baby. I love it.
That's a movie from the 80s, something like that.
Two men and, yeah.
Okay,
Anyway.
that's not the movie we're talking about today,
No,
but the
not at
movie we're
all.
talking about today is from the 80s.
Yeah, it is.
1989's
A very good year.
Glory. I said I'm going to be a little off topic, so you're going to have to help me. Reel me in, all right?
Okay.
All right.
Well, you know I'm bad at fishing, so we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, neither of us are very good at that.
Yeah, true.
All right, so 1989's Glory, winner of 3 Oscars, including, most notably, Denzel Washington's win for Best Supporting Actor.
Dude, he brought it. in the movie.
Is there any other reason to watch this movie?
Wow.
Yes, there is, but
Wow.
that is the one reason that I
Wow.
remember. So
Ugh.
I watched this in high school in history something,
And did not like it, right?
and I thought it was okay. I wasn't a huge fan, but the only thing I
Right.
remember is Denzel Washington's performance.
Yeah.
Specifically the scene whenever he runs away and gets captured and is flogged, and
Yeah, the single tier.
the single tear.
The
Man,
single man tier.
you can feel it.
Oh, yeah.
You can feel it. That's a powerful scene. Yeah, that scene and the very end is like the only thing I remembered from this movie at all.
Yeah.
Not that the rest of it's not memorable, but I mean, it was memorable. It just wasn't memorable enough, I guess.
Yeah, I think that it's important to note that this movie is the most accurate of the 3 that we've done so far.
So far,
And so because of that, it doesn't fluff itself up like Braveheart or like Gladiator does. Like, it's very much just like, this is more or less what happened to these soldiers.
so let's get to it.
All right.
All right, so we are really, I thought we were talking about Denzel's performance before we even got to any of the other characters or actors, and I thought it was interesting that this movie is not about Denzel or
No.
even the 54th. It's about, well, it starts out being about Robert Gould Shaw.
Yeah.
And
Who is played by Matthew Broderick.
yes, very well.
Ferris Bueller took a day off and enlisted in the army.
Yeah. So he's we start off with the little title card, and then we go into a little description giving us some setting. Robert Gould Shaw, also Robert Shaw is the name of the actor from Jaws.
Yeah.
Yeah, he played Quinn.
Yeah, if you're gonna look this guy up, you got to type Robert Gould.
Gould.
Otherwise,
Gould?
you're gonna Gould.
Gould?
Yeah, Gould. Gould.
Yeah, could, but with a G.
Because the man was a straight G.
That's right.
He could have survived the war, but OG, he didn't.
OG, he did not. What? Spoiler? They haven't gotten that far
Spoiler,
yet.
it's history. You get what? It's like watching The Crown. Just Wikipedia it.
I can't. I tried. I fall asleep every
There
time.
aren't spoilers for accurate movies. It's like Oppenheimer. Like, we all know they made the bomb.
Did they make the bomb?
Yes.
I haven't seen it yet.
I know. Well,
I'm kidding.
spoiler
I
alert.
have seen it.
They made a bomb.
Can you imagine a movie where they didn't make the bomb?
Oh my God, yeah, I
Yeah.
can. It's called We All Speak Japanese.
All right, moving on. So he's the son of a wealthy Boston abolitionist.
Yeah, sound it out.
23. I can read. We think. He was 23 when he enlisted to fight in the war between the states. Letters regarding the Army of the Potomac.
Potomac, yeah.
Potomac.
Potomac. It's the river outside of Washington, D.C.
Is it? Okay,
Yeah.
I was really confused because they just dropped that, and I was like,
Yeah,
what is that?
so it's the Union Army usually named their armies after like rivers, and the Confederate Army usually named their armies after states. So the Union Army is like the Army of the Ohio, or the Army of the Cumberland, or the Army
Which
of
is
the
also a
Potomac.
state, Ohio.
Yeah, it is, but the Ohio River. And then the Confederate Army would be like the Army of Tennessee, or the Army of Northern Virginia.
Nice.
Just a fun little history fact.
The Army of Florida.
Yeah, it's actually the same way
It's
they
just
named.
gators.
Ironically, it's the same way they name battles. So if the Union wins a battle, it's usually, with the exception of like Gettysburg, if there's a body of water near it and the Union wins, they name the battle after that body of water. So Antietam Creek.
Interesting.
Yeah, but if the South wins, they name it after the town. So the Battle of Chancellorsville, the South wins, they name it Chancellorsville.
So we start out at Antietam,
Yeah.
essentially. And I thought it was interesting. So basically, the movie is taken from.
Alexa found it on the web.
That's
I don't know
nice.
what it found on the web.
Thank
but they
you,
found it.
Alexa.
Alexa, leave me alone.
You are not our third co-host.
No,
No,
she's trying.
that would be
The pregnant woman.
pregnant woman who's in the corner doesn't say anything.
She snickers at us and tries not to fall asleep while she's listening
That's
to
fair
this.
enough. All right. Okay, what was I saying? Okay, so they are. So
Antietam.
he says in like one of the first, I guess his first letters to his family,
Mhm.
sending them back home. He says they are collecting such a force here that an attack would be insane. Now
Yes.
I had heard kind of I don't know if you would call it like little folk tales or myths or whatever you call it, but like people didn't really think the Civil War was going to turn into much of anything.
No.
They're like, oh no, it's going to be, we're going to get a picnic, we're going to see the formations, and then it's like, oh, holy crap, everyone is exploding and dying.
Yeah, so the Civil War starts out with both sides thinking that it's not going to be a real war, that it's just going to be a battle or maybe two, and they're going to beat the crap out of each other. And then the Union knows that they have superior numbers and superior industry, so they assume that they'll just bring a better army and win. But the South knows that most of the competent generals at that time, and also from today, were from the South, because the South has a deeper military tradition usually in American history than the North. So they were like, we have the leaders, and we are fighting to defend what we perceive as our rights. So we're in the right, so we'll fight harder and we'll win. And as we all know, it ended up being 4 years, and like the newest estimates are like 850,000 Americans dead, and yeah, it's bad.
America's bloodiest war.
Yeah. Mostly because we were killing each other, so it's really hard for the war where you kill each other to not be your bloodiest war.
Right. All right, so we start at Antietam. He's not in charge of anything at this point, really.
No.
Do we know what rank he was?
Not in the movie, but
before?
he's a captain at
Okay.
Antietam. So the cool thing about Robert Shaw is you could buy your commission back then. So you could just bankroll yourself into an officer position.
That seems like it could have a lot of downsides.
It does. Why do you think the Union gets curb stomped for the first 2 years of the war? Because it's just wealthy people buying.
Look at me. I'm a general.
Yeah. But Robert Shaw comes from a wealthy family, but he enlists as a private. So
Gotcha.
And he enlists in 1861, I believe. So by the time of Antietam, which is late 1862, he has moved up the ranks to a captain. So he's a competent soldier, if nothing else, in real life and in this movie. Like, he's leading men, not many men, but he's leading men into battle. And as far as his quote about the size of the army of the Potomac at one point was 150,000 men strong, which is crazy because that's like modern numbers of men for an army. And at the Battle of Antietam, 87,000 of them were involved.
Sheesh.
To put that into perspective,
it's like a Taylor Swift concert.
Yeah, the Continental Army in the American Revolution was only ever like 15,000 people strong.
It's a lot of Swifties.
The
coming
British Army that took New York in the American Revolution was like 25,000.
All right.
So this is for the time period, this is a big ass army.
Big ass army
that McClellan, the general, does nothing with. But that's a lesson for another time.
All right. So essentially, they're just lining up for slaughter, man. They're just,
Oh, yeah.
we're going to make our formations, we're going to walk in a line, and we are all going to get blown to shit. They are just.
It's bad. Dude, that guy gets his head blown off.
Oh my gosh, man.
And the trees are falling down.
There's so many parts of this movie. Like, you just see, it's not even like the main focus. It's like in the background. You just see a body fly like 15
Yeah.
feet into the
For
air.
a movie that is like long before modern CGI, the special effects are kind of crazy. Like
I
they,
don't. Oh yeah, it's definitely not. See, it's all practical.
yeah,
It has to be practical.
oh yeah.
For '89, you could definitely tell.
But
Yeah,
they're blowing up trees and there are craters in the ground
yeah.
and guys are getting yeeted like rag dolls all over the place.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So, Shaw ends up surviving essentially by taking cover behind dead bodies.
Yeah.
But what I found interesting was before the dust has even settled,
Hmm.
they're coming by, they're walking over the bodies and everything, and then he stands up and he walks over the hill, and like over the hill, there's another battle taking
Yeah.
place, like it's just another one.
Yeah.
That's just wild to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's 87, almost 90,000 men on the Union side, and then like 40,000 on the Confederate side. So that, I mean, Antietam is miles long, just
Hmm.
because it takes miles to line that many people up shoulder to shoulder.
And then we get to afterwards, he's got this little scratch on his neck,
Yeah, he
and
has like a shrapnel wound on his neck.
but we see in a nursing tent or a medical tent, and they are doing amputations,
Yeah.
passing them out like ice cream on summer, man.
Yep. And it's gruesome, and the guy screaming the whole time, and it's funny because
It is funny.
well, it's not funny.
I'm
The guy
kidding.
getting
That
his
was a
leg cut
joke.
off is very not funny. But it's interesting because the nurse or the orderly working on Shaw and fixing his neck wound is telling him about how they won the
Yeah.
battle, but the people he was with did not. His regiment or unit or whoever he was with got
You got
the
right, son.
shit murdered out of them in
Yeah.
the battle. So he gets back, and everybody in his area is dead. And the guy's like, "Oh, we won." By the way, just by the way, we won.
Not that you really helped, but
Yeah, like you guys didn't, but like we as a group, we won.
okay. So we get to this first part. It's just a little excerpt.
Mhm.
And I don't know exactly who's saying it. So if
Before we move on, I just
Oh,
want to
go
throw in a
ahead.
fun history fact. So Antietam is the bloodiest day in American history.
Dang.
More because they're killing like it's Americans killing Americans, but more Americans died at Antietam in one day than in any other war. So like World War II, World War One, doesn't matter
Wow.
because it's like 25,000 people dead in
Holy
one day.
crap.
Yeah,
In a
using
single
muskets
day.
and cannons. Yeah.
One shot at a time.
Yep. Yeah, there are reports that there were trees cut down by the amount of lead that was shot out of muskets.
Out of muskets.
Yeah. Well,
We're
I
not-
mean, there's 80,000 people, you know?
We're not
no,
talking
there's
machine guns
110,000.
and Predator. We're talking muskets.
Yeah.
Cutting down trees.
So, okay, not that many people died. It's that many people dead or wounded, but more like 5,000 people die, and then however many wounded die. But it's a lot.
But how many die afterwards?
Yeah,
due
well,
to
that's the question.
wounds,
Like, you don't know, but a lot of them, you
Yeah.
know, presumably, or they never fight again. So your army effectively lost.
Unless you're
like,
Thomas.
Yeah, it's
Thomas takes a wound. And he's like, "No, you are not
it's
kicking
brutal.
me out of here."
There's almost 23,000 total casualties between both armies in an 8-hour period because you can only it's the 1800s. You fight from sunup to sundown in
Wow.
September.
Can't see at night.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got from 8 in the morning probably to 7 at night. So you've got 11 hours of just nonstop death.
Wow.
It's 1,000 people. That's 2,000 people an hour killed or wounded.
That sounds horrible.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
So moving on to something less depressing than that.
Yes, the bondage of African Americans during the Civil War.
No. Okay. The triumph of
Yes.
these soldiers who are proving that they are
Right.
worthy of fighting.
Well, the guy reveals that Lincoln, because of the victory at Antietam, is going to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, which is also true. That is exactly what happened. Is Lincoln is waiting for a victory and the Union does not get one, and Antietam is a stalemate, but the Confederates retreat, so he calls it a victory. And he's like, "Cool. Well, now I can sign this order." So he
Nice.
does. Yeah.
So before they announce the 54th, which becomes the first like black
Yeah, the first
battalion.
fully black regiment in American history. Yeah.
Frederick Douglass is at this what would you call this house party
Meeting
of
I think
higher
it's
ups.
the governor's mansion is where I think
Yeah.
he's at. Yeah.
So they are discussing
In Massachusetts.
right.
Yeah.
So they're discussing a group of black soldiers who were given pikes
Mm-hmm.
and were corralled like cattle, and that was like some sort of battalion that was like half-ass assembled,
Yeah.
and then they scurry away. Do we know?
I
Is
didn't-
this something we can find?
I didn't find any specific evidence from the Civil War, but I do know that there's a long history of like underarming black conscripts and black volunteers and then wondering why they won't fight. So the British in the American Revolution actually did a similar thing. They recruited a bunch of escaped and freed slaves from colonial like slaveholders and then told them they would fight the rebels and gave them pikes and sent them across a bridge into musket fire. So I don't know for sure that that ever happened during the Civil War, but there's a very long history in the United States of using like the underwhelming equipment given to African American soldiers as reasons to why they can't fight and why
Hmm.
they're inferior.
All right.
So did it happen specifically in the Civil War? I don't think so. But was it a good little like
But it
taste
did
of
happen
like
in
the
history.
like was it a good taste of the opinion of black soldiers? Yes. Yes it was.
So essentially, at that same meeting, the 54th is born, the 54th Massachusetts.
Yeah.
So we are then taken to Reedville Camp
Mhm.
in 1862. We're introduced to Denzel Washington's
Oh yeah.
absolutely amazing portrayal of Private Tripp,
Private Trip
who
in
clearly
the same tent as Private Sharks.
does not. So this Tripp does not. He does not fall for. Oh, this is so progressive. We are gonna make you real soldiers.
He's just there for the gun and the paycheck, man.
He doesn't fall for it one bit. And I think his character, you know, first off, who could blame him?
Oh yeah. I mean,
Being pessimistic and not even pessimistic, but just not seeing, not falling for the lies that have been given
yeah.
time and time before.
Well,
Probably.
and like I can't put too fine of a point on this. Like there are probably no white people who aren't racist in the 1800s, even the ones who think slavery is bad. And
even
the
Shaw.
yeah, well, I mean, he shows that he's a little bit racist. But even the ones who are abolitionists who truly believe that you should treat African Americans equally, they don't really think they're equal is the problem.
Right.
And like Tripp is very like he's just a white guy who likes to beat on black soldiers.
So this brings to me, his character, in my opinion, makes it to where you can really look at this movie from two different perspectives.
Mhm.
You can look at it as in whole as something that was, a precedent, had not been done before and became more popular. We'll see towards the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And this great triumph. Or
Mhm.
you can see it as
This like token, like not handout because they're going to go fight and die, but like this like token gesture of like
look at
yes,
us. We're the North. We
and
support you.
we
We're
don't
fighting for
we
you.
don't have organized slavery. Yeah.
Right. And also you're gonna do all the manual labor.
Yeah.
And we're gonna end up marching you into a fort that you cannot take.
Yeah, so I think it's good that his character is kind of the foil to Morgan Freeman's character.
Right.
So Morgan Freeman plays this man Rollins who becomes
Mhm.
Sergeant
Sergeant Major
John Rollins. And he's not naive. So the four soldiers that you focus on are Tripp, so Denzel Washington's character, Morgan Freeman's character Rollins, this escaped slave whose last name is Sharts, and that's all we ever know is that he's Private Sharts.
and he's a good shot.
And he's kind of the. It's funny because they're all a foil of each other. So Tripp is the almost too seasoned and too wizened, like he's too disillusioned to know what's even good for him. Sharts is super naive and is like, "Hey, I escaped from the plantation. This is a good. They feed me. Like I'm happy
And
to
is
be
completely uneducated.
Yeah.
And in all honesty, like not in a negative connotation anyway, but he is kind of ignorant.
here." Yeah, he is. I mean,
He's-
he has a stutter.
He can't read.
It's not implied that he's unintelligent. It's just that he escaped.
Uneducated.
I think he's the newest escapee. Is kind of the vibe that you get. So he has newly freed himself from bondage, and he's enlisted in this regiment to go take it back, like to the south, and to go. And that's all well and good, but and then Thomas is the well-educated African American man who
Son
is
of a free man.
son of a free man. So his family's been free for at least a generation. Who is best friends with both Colonel Shaw and Colonel Shaw, second in command, Major Forbes,
Mm-hmm.
and he truly believes that this is going to be great, that this is the stepping stone for the black people, for that they will be able to prove themselves. And then Sergeant Rollins falls right in the middle of all of these guys, where he's like, well, we can,
He sees it for what it is.
we have an opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
but they're still white people,
I think Thomas. I think
he's like, they're well intentioned, but they're still white people, and they don't understand what we go through and what we've been through.
I think Rollins is the most realistic in his perception of things, but he is also the most optimistic in his attitude
Yes.
about it. And Thomas, he's almost like he's naive of how much struggle there's going to be before this is. I mean, this is talking about something from 1862,
Yeah, well,
and it's still there's still a racial divide in our country today.
but Thomas is naive of the life of a soldier.
Mhm.
Sharts is naive about the situation at hand. I don't really think Thomas is as naive about racism or the inherent racism in society.
No. I'm not saying that. I'm
But
saying
he's naive about what goes into being a soldier.
And I would say how much fight and how much bloodshed there has to be before his side wins.
And
He's the educated one. He's the one who is reading literature to the other soldiers, and I mean, think about it in our mind. Looking at it now, it would be like, well, this our side has to win. Our side, because our side is the only one that makes logical sense.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of angry, racist people standing in the way of that becoming reality.
Yeah, and it's important to note that objectively, the Civil War is about slavery because if nothing else, it's about states' rights to have slavery as a legal thing.
Right.
That being said, not everybody in the 1860s would have agreed with that statement, not even everybody in the North. So most Northerners before the Emancipation Proclamation, especially the ones who live in Ohio, Minnesota, not the Northeast, think that it's a war against the uppity, low-key feudalist South that think they can just disregard federal law. It becomes about slavery between the Emancipation Proclamation and Union soldiers invading the South and seeing the conditions that slaves live in. But yeah, so I think that that's not directly said in the movie, but the four characters do a really good job of kind of implying that. All is not well. The Union is not this giant abolitionist army.
Oh no, we're the good guys. We're gonna go beat up the bad guys.
Yeah.
There's a lot of gray.
It's a lot of we're the good guys because we're not the bad guys. Is kind of the vibe you get. We're the better guys.
And I think it comes down to, I mean, look at how the North treated the 54th and what they the Northern soldiers, they have that scene wherever the Northern soldiers are basically egging on the 54th about go did a latrine. And
well, even when they're assembled and they're training, they assemble the regiment, and Robert realizes he's 25, and he's like, I am not I don't know, capable of training these men, but I need to train them because if they go to combat, the eyes of the entire nation will be on them. And more importantly, I don't want good men to die because I didn't train them. So he hires this racist AF Irish sergeant who just comes in.
I thought there was a great scene in here. He's talking about with that sergeant. He's talking about Thomas.
Right.
Who is not a good soldier.
No, he's not. He just objectively is not.
He really isn't. He just doesn't have the intensity. He doesn't have
any grit. I think in training camp, when they're training the regiment, all the other three in the tent have grit, and Thomas doesn't.
So Shaw pulls him aside and says, "Ease up on him," essentially.
Right.
And then the Irish sergeant says, "You grew up together?" And he goes, "Yes." And he says, "Let him grow up some more."
Oh yeah.
And I feel like, in a way, okay, so you at first glance you're like, "Oh, this guy's racist. He wants to beat up on the black soldiers." But if you take a moment, he'd be doing the same thing for white soldiers.
I think it's
two white soldiers.
I think in a movie full of gray, Sergeant Mulcahy is the epitome of the gray because he very clearly enjoys it too much.
Right.
And he uses insults that he just you just know he wouldn't use with white soldiers. A, because he wouldn't be able to, but B, because he wouldn't. And it's even Major Forbes, so Robert Shaw's best friend, who is a little more sympathetic and a little less naive
almost
than Robert
too
is,
sympathetic.
but he's too sympathetic. he's like, Irish people are not known for their
Yeah,
affection
no,
for
that's
African
true.
Americans.
He says,
And Robert's like, I understand that, but he's training them to be good soldiers. And so it's
right.
that, like, Shaw knows that the dude's racist, but he also knows he's a good sergeant who's training good soldiers.
Shaw's,
so he
I feel
kind of
like
just accepts it. Like,
Shaw stands right in between the two.
yeah, he does. He's like, we can't baby them and we can't accommodate them, but we also can't ignore like what we have done to their people. So he tries but then Shaw kind of has his slip. So we keep getting off into these tangents. So we'll get through like the training camp scene and then we'll kind of pick it apart. So the Mulcahy trains them. Thomas is not a good soldier. Trip, though he's an asshole, is a really good soldier.
Mm-hmm.
And he is good at fighting to the point that at one point Thomas is doing a bayonet drill and he's bad at it. And the sergeant tells him to stab him, disarms him, and smacks him across the face with this musket and just knocks the dog shit out of him. And Thomas has a mental breakdown because, like, who wouldn't? I mean, you just got rickrolled by this sergeant who's abusing you for 3 months.
You think he's going to abandon the battalion.
You think he will, and he doesn't. But Tripp makes fun of him, and Shaw is like, Sergeant, stop that man. A, because Thomas is his best friend, but B, like at this point, Tripp is just not the type of guy you want in a regiment. Like, he's a good soldier, but he loves to, like, just bully everybody. So the sergeant pulls him aside.
Very hard-headed.
Yeah, the sergeant pulls him aside and says, all you have left to learn is when to shut your damn mouth, and, like, throws him across the bar.
Pretty much.
So the sergeant is, like I said, the sergeant is clearly racist, but he's not like, oh man, I'm not even going to say it. He's not predatory towards the soldiers any more so than a normal sergeant would be.
I think.
But he's also just like, he's extra, like he kind of is too. You just watch the movie.
There's a satisfaction to it.
That he likes it too much. Like you can tell the actor does a great job because the actor does a great job of like, I'm being enough of a sergeant that you're not going to stop me, but I'm going to push the absolute boundary of how much I can abuse these these men because I like it, because I want to. So there's that. There is this thing where there's a requisition order for shoes and guns and uniforms, and they are in training camp for months and months and months, and they never get it. And the quartermaster is like, "Well, we just don't have enough supplies."
But he offers him jam.
Yeah, but he offers him this, like, frivolous shit.
We have some
right?
blueberry jam. Yeah. The way he says it, like, it was just so delicious. This blueberry jam.
Just picture like the smarmiest, greasiest, like corrupt businessman, and that is the quartermaster. Like,
imagine
you just see him, and you're like, this guy's on the take. Right?
Imagine the man that you don't want to see alone at a park.
Yeah,
that's him.
Yeah, pretty much. You don't want to see him. Like,
no offense to that actor.
You don't want. Well, he's the loan officer that you walk into the bank and you're like, I don't want to get my money.
Nope.
Like, nope. I'll go to another bank. So Shaw finally grows up. Like, honestly, most of training camp is Colonel Shaw kind of sticking his head in the mud and being like, if I just don't rock the boat, this will be fine. Like, we'll get this figured out. And he finally realizes that he can't do that because he's the colonel of a black regiment in a racist ass army. And so he literally brings like 6 soldiers with him and mafiosos this guy into providing shoes and guns and uniforms for his men. And he basically tells him that, do you know who I am? Like, my father's best friends with the governor, and I'm a colonel, you piece of shit. I outrank you, and I will go to the War Department.
He has to do it twice.
He does.
He does it with the quartermaster.
Yeah, and then he has to do it way later in the movie.
And then he has to do it later
with a general
to let them actually fight.
But so he does that, and he gets them the shoes and the supplies, and they train up and they march really well. Like, they become a very, very organized unit. And then although before we ship them south, before they go south, it's important to note that, like, Colonel Shaw grows up during training because he tries to be the professional soldier, but then he goes too far. And his friend, there's an excellent scene where Shaw has become pretty aloof, and he's like, well, the sergeant has to abuse them because they have to be good soldiers, and they're not good soldiers. And my best friend is a really bad soldier, so he has to abuse him. And his best friend and his second in command is like, I understand that, but you are treating them like they're your slaves.
Right.
Like, you need to process that you are being a racist jackass without even meaning to. Like, you're not trying to be, but you are at one point, Shaw gives him an order, and he walks away, and he goes, yes, Massa, of course, Massa, you know everything, and we's the ignorant little children.
Yeah.
And he tells him to stand at attention, and he does, and you're like, oh, there's going to be a fight.
Right.
But it kind of slaps him back into reality. And to top that all off, you think Tripp deserts the regiment briefly, and he comes back. Turns out he's looking for shoes because they don't have shoes, and his feet are torn up.
Yeah,
because
they're a wreck. I mean, like blisters on
and that's
blisters.
they kind of it's a recurring theme with his character through the training segment. Um, and like that's what spurs Shaw to get the shoes, but Shaw has him whipped. So Colonel Shaw has him
Flawed. They
flogged.
call it
It's
flawed.
whipping.
It's whipping.
He has him tied to a wagon wheel
And that's when Forbes
and whipped.
stops
And Forbes is like, "What the hell
he's
are
like,
you
not this way.
doing?"
Not this
He
way.
goes, "You can't whip not them. Like you can't whip that." And Shaw does it anyway. And that's
Well, Shaw has the sergeant do it.
well,
but
yeah. I mean, Shaw doesn't personally, but Shaw he's like, well, we have to have military discipline, and so he whips him, and Trip looks him in the eye the entire time,
yeah.
and like you can see like Colonel Shaw be like, oh my god, what am I doing? Like it's brilliant acting. Like it's great scene design, and it's great acting, but he like Colonel, you can see in Colonel Shaw's eye, he's like, oh my god,
I think that's when he
I am having a former slave whipped.
Right. And then you can see his back. You can see his back before, the flogging begins is
Yeah.
that I mean he's just torn
And
up.
the fact that he takes it, you're like, oh my god, how many times has this guy been? Because he does, like he just leans on the wagon wheel and just gets.
Well, you can see
whipped.
the pain. It's pride. It's
Yeah.
I mean his face, Denzel Washington's face is just 100% pride. You can see him grimacing like he's
Yeah.
showing that it hurts. It's not that it doesn't.
No, he's not immune to it, but he's obviously like he's been whipped enough that he can just stand there and take it.
Well,
like,
he not only that he refuses to let it
Right.
show, to the
Yep.
point to where he won't let it bother him. It's easy, like I said at the beginning. This is the performance that I remembered from
Yeah,
years ago
it's so
watching it.
good.
It's really the only part that stuck with me.
Yeah.
It's so powerful. It changes Shaw's character.
Yeah, and
as a result,
that power, and then Morgan Freeman kind of biting his ass a little bit. Rollins is he asks him, he's like, so why did he desert? You can speak your mind. And he goes, shoes, sir. The men need shoes. You haven't gotten them any shoes.
Right.
He was
We're
literally
saying this out of order. This
Yeah.
was before he went and mafiosoed the
right, but
the
this is all leading
quartermaster.
up. The mafioso part is like the beginning of Shaw's redemption arc, and then he finishes it with they're receiving their pay shortly before they march south. And they were told when they enlisted that they were going to receive the standard Union Army rate of $13.
$13 a month.
Which is, at the time, some pretty thorough middle class money. Like that, it's probably not worth getting shot over, but it's good money. Like you're not going to turn it down. They are then told when they are standing in line to get paid that they will get $10 because they are a black regiment.
Mm-hmm.
And Tripp and Rollins and Thomas start not a riot, but they start a protest against the wages because they're like a black soldier stops a bullet as well as a white soldier.
Yep.
And it starts to get a little out of hand. They get a little rowdy, and Shaw fires his revolver in there, and he goes, if you men will not take any pay, neither will we, and tears up his slip. And then that's when you can see that he has become invested in his men, and his men have become invested in him. And he's no longer Robert Shaw, the 25-year-old kid who got appointed as colonel. Like he is now Colonel Shaw. Like he is in charge. And then they go south.
So they go south. And right around that time also is when John Rollins becomes the first black sergeant major.
Yep, on the boat.
Is that true?
I couldn't find so every character in the regiment who isn't Shaw is made up.
Okay.
They're not purely fictional. Like one of his best friends was his subordinate, and there was a black sergeant major. Two of Frederick Douglass's sons actually served in that regiment,
in the
and
54th?
one of them was a sergeant.
Oh wow!
In it, I found the name. I'll look it up when we're doing the little history thing at the end of the podcast. But there was a soldier who was elected sergeant major in that regiment, and he sounds like John Rollins is probably based off of him. But no, John Rollins isn't a real person. Neither is Forbes. Neither are any of the guys. They're amalgamations of the real soldiers. Because
Gotcha.
the movie's based off of Robert Shaw's letters, but past that, like you only know his thoughts. So
yeah,
but yeah, that was a thing, and I couldn't find record of the first, the first sergeant major, who was black in the army. But I'm assuming it'd be the Civil War. Would be my guess.
Yeah.
I can't promise that. It's very possible that there was a sergeant in like the engineers or a specialty group, like even in the Revolution. But it was uncommon for sure, because if you don't have black regiments, you're not going to have black sergeants. So even if he's not the first in real life, like it is a rare thing to happen.
Before we move on, before they start marching, there's
Yeah.
one more thing that I wanted to talk about. And I wasn't sure if there was any, either if this was straight from history or if this was something that was kind of added.
Sure.
there's a Confederate proclamation that any prisoner of war of color will be returned to slavery. And if they're in federal uniform, this is before they receive their blue uniforms,
Mhm.
they'll be killed, and any white commanders of black soldiers will be killed. So, is there any any
Yeah,
facts to this? Is this just kind of
I
hearsay?
didn't get a chance to dig into that as deeply as I would like. A if it wasn't a du jour proclamation, it was a de facto thing. So like
Okay.
I don't know if the Confederate Congress ever came out and was just like black soldiers get executed, but it was the norm. Like you did not expect to be taken as a prisoner of war if you were a black soldier.
Okay.
Case in point, Fort Pillow in 1864. General Bedford Forrest, who started the Klan, by the way, a Confederate general takes Fort Pillow in like Tennessee.
Fort Pillow?
Fort Pillow, yeah.
Was
It's
it
important
soft?
because he takes it. It's manned primarily by African American soldiers, and
Mm.
he kills all of them.
What an
He and,
ass.
he and his men. They surrender the fort. He kills them, and he kills the white officers that try to stop him.
Okay.
So, like I said, I'll look it up while we're doing the podcast because it's possible that it's a real thing. But even if they didn't explicitly say it, it was expected.
Okay. All right. So then we move south. All right. So they finally get to they think they're going to get to fight and get some action, and all this preparation, all this training has finally led to this moment, and it's something that all the soldiers of the 54th and Shaw are very much pushing for.
Oh, it was a real thing. May 1st, 1863, a joint resolution adopted by the Confederate Congress and signed by Davis adjusted this policy and declared that all, and I'm just going to warn you, outdated and inappropriate language coming, Negroes or mulattoes, slave or free, taken in arms should be turned over to the authorities in the state in which they were captured, and that their officers would be, and it goes on and on. But yeah,
So it was real.
It was real.
Holy crap!
That was a
So
declaration.
that sends a mess. I think what it does in the film in here is he says, if you want to turn around and leave, you can.
Yeah, like
Anyone who wants to
we
leave.
will write you like discharge papers. It's
Yes.
okay.
So then he wakes up the next morning and he's like, "How many do we have left?"
And it's
And
every single
Forbes
one of them.
says, "All of them."
Yep.
And it just really brings this is win or die.
And
This is
it's funny because that declaration begins the process of uniting Forbes and his officers with his men. Not Forbes, Shaw and Forbes and their officers with their men, because the officers will be executed too. Like that's the important point of the declaration is if you're leading black troops, we consider you to be a black troop and we will kill you on sight.
So they finally they're moving. They're moving down.
They're taking boats south. They end up in South Carolina.
South Carolina, 1863.
Yep.
The 54th march to the coast of Georgia.
Yep.
And the battalion that they're also marching with also has black soldiers, but they're not the same.
Well, it's a contraband battalion.
Okay.
In the movie, it's not. In real life, it's pretty similar to the 54th. So the 54th wasn't the only one; it was just the most famous. And
Gotcha.
I think it was the first to be fully like authorized and ready. But basically, the Emancipation Proclamation comes out, and there's a handful of commanders across the Union Army. They're like, "Oh, cool, okay, time to arm the black people." Like,
Makes
why
sense.
not let them fight? It's a
Right.
war against the slave empire. Like, yeah. So, but in the movie, yeah, it's a conscript regiment. So it's slaves that were freed by the invasion of the Union Army,
Mm-hmm.
who have been armed and not very clearly not trained, and kind of just assembled into this militia of armed, angry former slaves that are commanded by this crazy dude
Who admits to being a former slave owner.
Yep.
Not a good look, bro.
Yeah, well, his family at least, like when he was growing up. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I grew up. Yeah,
he's
that's
from
what he
Kansas.
says. Yeah.
He's so it's kind of it's funny. It's a throwaway line to people who don't study the Civil War, but he's introduced to this dude who looks crazy. Like he looks like he stuck his finger in an electrical socket, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his name, I'll look up his name, but he's also a colonel, and he is in control of this contraband regiment. And he is from Kansas, and he is a Jayhawker from Kansas. So the Civil War arguably starts in Kansas almost 10 years before it starts in the U.S. Like 1850 onward, Kansans and Missourians are just killing the crap out of each other along the Kansas-Missouri border because Missouri tried to infiltrate the Kansas elections and make it a slave state. And they did, up until somebody called bullshit and was like, we need a new election because more
Missouri.
people voted than the population of Kansas.
Ouch.
So they stop it. They're a free state. They're killing each other left and right. And it's important, like, if you know history, that is like, this guy whacked out. Because if he's a Jayhawker is the Union version of a bushwhacker.
Right.
So they're guerrilla fighters who murder each other in the woods and in their homes. So the dude is whack, is kind of the message that Shaw gets meeting him. And he is very whack, as it turns out.
Yeah, so they come to a town where they ransack and kill civilians.
Yeah.
All the soldiers are already gone. There's no battle taking place.
Montgomery, Colonel James Montgomery is the
James Montgomery.
He's a real person, by the way. And he is a Jayhawker from Kansas who did lead his regiment in Jayhawker guerrilla warfare in the South.
So this did happen, because that's one of the questions.
Yeah, no, it is a documented incident where Shaw tried to get the guy court-martialed.
Okay.
Yeah, is that he burned a town that had nobody in it and showed no resistance for no other reason than to just punish the South for being the South.
Just for shits and grins.
Yep.
That's horrible. Okay, well, I was interested if that was
and the only difference
really
is that, as far as I can tell, his regiment was like a legitimate. I mean, it was made up of freed slaves, like immediately freed slaves. But it was, as far as I can tell, like a trained, armed, like a real regiment.
So we're getting towards the end here. The 54th finally gets their first real fight.
Oh yeah. Only because they put him on manual labor, and that's that scene you were talking about earlier, where the white soldiers talk crap to the 54th.
Right.
And I mean, so there's a scene shortly after the village burning, where Shaw kind of protests it, so his men get put on manual labor, and they're unloading the cargo ships, and they're building the encampment, and these white soldiers who just look like absolute hell. Like,
they look like they just came back from hell.
March past them,
and Tripp's like, "You're going the wrong way."
I was gonna say, in the white soldiers' marginal defense, Tripp decides to be an asshole, and is like, "You're going the wrong way. The fight's up there." And the guy's like, "Yeah, I know. We just
all you gotta do is send us in."
Yeah, and Tripp's like, "Well," and he goes, because it's one of those awful arguments where you hate to say it because of the situation, but you kind of are on the white soldiers' side until you aren't, until they become racist, basically.
Right, yeah, because they are coming back from getting their asses kicked in a battle, and Tripp's like, well, why did you lose?
And he's like, why did you lose? And he's like, well, because we just did, like, people died. And Tripp's like, well, if you'd send us, and one guy goes, my guy, there are men fighting and dying back there. And the guy's like, well, it would only be the Confederates dying if you sent us. And that's when the white guys decide to get real racist.
They
did, fast.
Yeah. But there's definitely a divide. And then that same character, I don't know who he is, but that same guy who says some not so PC things to him later on encourages them whenever they end up marching on Fort Widener.
Yeah, so Rollins comes up and is like, what the hell? Like, why are we fighting? And the white guy says something incredibly racist. And he goes, you're looking at a higher rank corporal. Move along.
Yeah.
And then he says something even more racist to him about him being a sergeant. And right as the 54th is probably about to just unleash an unholy can of whoop-ass on these guys, Forbes, the second in command, comes up and he's like, I want your name, soldier. I'm putting you up on charges. And Rollins, in the biggest man move of big man moves, says there's no need for that. These guys are just exhausted.
Just lets them go.
Let them go.
Yeah.
And it's Rollins' constant thing is do not be part of the problem, be part of the solution.
Right.
And Rollins is very aware that Tripp picked that fight.
He's very much that, and he's also a turn the other cheek. Show them, because it proves to him that, oh, I'm the problem.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and that's when he has his showdown. So there's this showdown bubbling between Tripp and Rollins the whole movie. Is because Rollins is a sergeant. He's a very authoritative guy. You just sense that, like, the man can throw down if he needs to through the whole movie, but he doesn't like to.
Right.
And Tripp finally calls him an Uncle Tom, which is an awful freaking thing to call somebody in that at any time context, but especially then, because it basically means that, well, no, yeah, he does, and then he calls him the white man's dog. So he just, and some other very racist things that I, as a white guy, am not going to say on this podcast.
Nah.
But you can imagine.
Go watch the movie.
Go watch the movie. You'll find out. And Rollins slaps the crap out of him and just basically tells him that he is the only piece of trash in the regiment and he needs to get his shit together because he can pick his path. And, like, he's not picking the right one.
He essentially just tells them that he's
and he
full
reminds
of
them all
anger.
that no matter how racist the white soldiers are, he tells him, he goes, you're so full of hate because you've been chased by dogs and whipped. And he goes, that may not be living, but it sure as hell isn't dying. And dying's all that these white boys have been doing for the last 2 years. And he goes, dying for you, fool.
Yeah.
So he just, because Rollins is actually the gravedigger who finds Colonel Shaw at the very beginning of the movie in Antietam. And so he has seen it, and he's aware that the white guys are not actually fighting for, like, in their personal selves, they're not fighting for African Americans. But he's also like, these white guys who do not like you are getting shot to hell more or less because of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, you owe them at least an iota of respect for that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if nothing else, don't pick a fight with them when they march by, is kind of the message. Like, why? Why are you picking a fight with everybody, Trip?
I mean, and I really feel like there's not one side completely in the wrong, not one side completely in the
No.
right here, because it is Trip has every right to be angry.
Oh yeah, of course he does.
You
I
know.
mean, and he has. And he has every right to resent the white soldiers
Mm-hmm.
and the way they treat him. But then on the flip side, you're shit talking guys who've just gotten the crap shot out of them for the last hour. But then on
Yeah.
the flip side, you're being a racist piece of crap for absolutely
yeah.
no reason.
Like I said, nobody's right.
It's an argument where you're just like, oh my god, why
Nobody's
is this,
100%
why is this
right.
argument happening? Like,
Yeah, it's just not good. It's not a
what
good
are we
situation.
doing?
But they're angry. They're ready to fight, and they're not being allowed to fight.
Yeah.
So they finally get a battle.
Yes, they do.
So
Because Shaw goes all mafioso
again,
again
yeah.
for the second time, and he shows up to the general's office and he goes, "Why won't you let my men fight?" And he's like, "Well, you're too important for my operations here." And he's like, "Ah, yes, your operations of burning down innocent people and houses and smuggling cotton,
Smuggling things
and
in,
taking the money,
sending
out."
back basically treasures that they find along the way.
Man, it's like a lesson in being the Godfather, because he just reclines in this guy's office chair and is like, "Well, I mean, I'll have no choice but to report it to the War Department.
So
Like,
would
it's
you
out of
say
my hands."
you said that guy's name, James Montgomery?
Yeah,
is just sitting there playing
the harpsichord, which is just this old twangy piano.
the most non-threatening
The dude-
instrument from
Well,
the
he wore a
the
straw hat, like a straw gardening hat.
from the craziest, most
To march.
racist man in the Union Army.
Oh yeah, never forget that this guy said that you have to wipe away the Confederacy in a sea of blood like the Jews of old.
Yeah.
So not only is he crazy, but he's also anti-Semitic. So that's fun.
Well, I mean, I feel like at that point, that's not really a bit
No,
surprise.
it's not a big surprise, but like it just adds to just how awful this guy
He's
is
a
from our
terrible
modern
person.
eyes. You're like, oh my god.
But he's sitting there with his god awful hairline, just playing this
god-awful. He does.
stupid instrument
That
that
poor
sounds.
guy. That dude's gonna be
horrible.
bald by 40 if he makes it that long.
I don't
But
think you did.
I don't-
Maybe
I-
I don't know.
he died in 1871. That's all I know. That's what I got.
All right.
But yeah, so they get their fight because Robert Shaw is like very much in control now. Like he's done screwing around.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm done with all of you corrupt racist assholes. Just put us on the front line. It'll be better there.
So do we know what this fight is?
Yeah, it's actually the Battle of Grimball's Landing. is what it's
Grimball's
called.
Landing.
Yeah.
So essentially in the movie, it is in a foggy forest.
Yeah, it's on an island outside of South Carolina, so that track.
Oh, that's
Right.
cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, so anyways, the fight happens. There's some rebels running or riding horses at them, and letting out that rebel yell, and they get shot. And the 54th is like, "Let's go! We won the battle!"
And then here come the infantry.
and then the line of Confederate
Confederates,
soldiers
yeah.
just walks in slowly.
Oh, it's such a
And
good, such
it's
a
like, oh my gosh.
well-directed scene.
So I don't know if maybe I remember parts of it like without knowing that I remember parts of it.
Right.
But when they shot all the guys on horses,
Oh, yeah.
and they're sitting there celebrating. I was like, please, for the love of God, reload.
Yeah, like reload.
Good God,
That
reload.
can't be it. Like
Reload.
that's not it.
And then they finally show up and they're like, oh, we have to reload. I'm like, damn it.
Yep. And then when you're watching, like when you see the line of the soldiers, you realize that not all, and they don't say this, but you kind of like process that not all the 54th is there. Like it looks like it's kind of like half of them, when you see the battle line,
Mhm.
and then this very, very large line of Confederate infantry walk out of the mist,
They look like they're outnumbered
like
for sure.
silently.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
terrifying.
It really is. I thought it was interesting. I don't know where we are exactly and who's winning, who's losing, but
Right.
the Confederate soldiers don't look very well dressed. They're not all in red uniform.
No.
They kind of look like they've been sleeping in the woods for a
so
month.
At this point, so the whole movie, the movie takes place from 1862 to 1863.
Mm-hmm.
The 54th in real life is 1863 through the rest of the war. But the whole movie, battle-wise, takes place in the middle of 1863 in July. And at this point, it's a mixed bag. So there's this misconception in social memory that the Confederacy is winning the Civil War before Gettysburg, and that's not true. The Union is just not winning.
It's like one
It's a
successful
stalemate.
march to Gettysburg, but it's not the entire
No,
war.
so at this point, here's the situation at hand is that New Orleans has fallen to the Union. All of the major cities except for Vicksburg, Mississippi, along the Mississippi River have fallen to the Union.
Mm.
The outer islands of North and South Carolina have fallen to, and chunks of coastal Georgia and Florida have fallen to the Union. So the Greater Confederacy is still intact, but they are by no means nobody's winning. Is really my point. It's
a lot of bodies.
Yeah, is the Confederacy is never legitimately winning the Civil War, but they are kind of at the point where it looks like if they can kill enough Union soldiers in the next 6 months, they might be able to force them to back down. But on the flip side, the Union's like, well, hell, I've cut you in half except for Vicksburg. I have your biggest city in New Orleans. I am approaching. I have outer Virginia, outer South Carolina. So yeah, it's a very mixed bag. But at that time, the men they'd have been facing would have just been whatever army the Confederates had staying around. So they wouldn't have been Lee's like professionals. They wouldn't have been Joe Johnston's professionals in Tennessee. Like they'd have been like soldiers, but they probably would have looked pretty similar to that, honestly.
So in the movie, he casually mentions like you had 42 casualties.
Yeah.
Is it roughly?
That's a true statistic. Yeah.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yep. That battle is it's brutal, but it's accurate. I mean, they stand and they volley each other, and then they go to hand combat. And in reality, I think generally you just volleyed each other till somebody backed off. But it makes for better movie if you go hand to hand. And
Trip goes hard.
Dude, they all go hard.
Yeah, but him especially, man.
But Trip beats the guy to death with a piece of wood.
Yeah,
right?
He's like, I found a stick and I'm going to kill you with it.
You see the training pay off because the 54th gets surprised by this Confederate line. The Confederates fire first, and the 54th stand there, absorb it, and just unleash this ungodly accurate volley into the Confederate line.
Right.
And then they charge each other with bayonets. And it is brutal and awful, and people are screaming, and there's battle smoke everywhere.
And Thomas
gets shot through the shoulder, and then saves Trip's life, which is interesting.
Yes,
with a bayonet.
With a bayonet,
the same drill he was so bad at in training, which I find interesting.
But he trained, he practiced.
Rollins kicks ass sharp. The battle is interesting because there's all these little moments during training where the soldiers have clearly improved. So like Rollins is a pacifist. Trip lets his anger, like he wants to fight everybody. Thomas can't fight, and Sharts panics under pressure. He's a crack shot you see in training, but as soon as Robert Shaw, the Colonel Shaw, starts firing bullets next to his head, he panics.
Right.
And in the battle,
they each have
Rollins opens a can of whoop ass on like 4 Confederate soldiers.
Right.
Trip fights to win, but keeps moving on and doesn't get caught up in the fight. Thomas bayonets a guy in the back and takes a bullet to the shoulder, and Sharts loads a muzzle-loading rifle as a guy with a bayonet is running at him and calmly executes him with it at the last possible moment.
Right.
So it's this like redemption battle.
Right.
And Shaw kills a bunch of people. Forbes fights like a crazy son of a bitch. Like they are soldiers. Like
and that's the Hollywood side of it. That's the foreshadowing early on, which is what you want to make a movie more satisfying.
Yeah,
it makes people go, "Oh, I remember that from earlier." It's a little trick for the screenwriters to put in there.
But that battle actually happened on the same day they say it does in the movie. Casualties are about right. So yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, they nailed it.
So, and then immediately they were like, well, there's this fort. It's super hard to get to, and it's whoever attacks it first is gonna have like severe casualties.
Yeah.
And Shaw's like, yep, we'll do
it.
Yep, we'll do it.
Of course we will.
I thought that was like, if I were to make my biggest complaint about this movie is that scene right there. They're just like, it just cuts to them on the beach. They're like, here's the fort. You're gonna die.
Yeah.
And Shaw's like, okay. Like, they don't explain it
they don't
at all.
Yeah, in real life, so the Battle of Grimbal's Island happens because it's a distracting action for the first attack on Fort Wagner, which also fails, obviously, because there had to be a second one. But so it's all part of the same like the campaign is to take the Fort Wagner and another fort.
Gotcha.
And the Battle of Grimbal's Island is like there is a white regiment or 3 attacking the fort, and so the 54th and some other regiments are flanking them and get ambushed by a Confederate counterattack.
So essentially the last 20-30 minutes of this movie is just, we're all gonna die, we know it, here's what we're thankful for, here's the blessings, here's what we want to say, we're all family.
The general that gives them the description of the fort is a real guy who also dies in that battle.
Oh, he went with them.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, he commanded his own battalion and was fatally wounded in the thigh by a grape shot.
Okay, so this battle is fantastic. I mean, it's hard to watch because you've really grown with all of these characters. and you're watching them get blown to bits, and it's
It's
horrible.
awful. Well, and it's this godforsaken fort that's built into a sand dune,
Hmm.
just in the middle of the beach, and the Union Navy shells it, and then they charge at it to get close enough to wait for nightfall. And the to me, the scariest scene in that is when he's like, "We'll shell them to make sure they're suppressed." And as soon as the shelling stops, just hundreds of Confederate soldiers run out from like these bunkers that they
Oh
have in the
yeah,
fort, and you're like, "Oh no!"
no, they just been hiding.
Yeah, you're like, "Oh no!"
That's not good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the 54th really doesn't stand a chance, and doesn't shouldn't get as far as they do.
No.
So they probably lose half their men getting to this large
It feels like
dune.
it. They lose a lot of
They lose a lot of men before they even get to the dunes. They
yeah.
wait for the nightfall, and then they make their charge.
Mhm.
Shaw is kind of leader of the charge and is one of the
Yeah.
first ones to go down.
Well, they finally get the thing is they like run across the beach, right? And they're being shelled. And when the guy describes the fortifications of Fort Wagner, he's like they have
Mhm.
one 10-inch wide like smoothbore cannon. They have 3 10-pounders. They have like 4 howitzers, and it's garrisoned by roughly 1,000 men. And you're like, oh my god.
And we're gonna send one battalion in.
Well, they send the whole army. The battalion just is leading it.
It has to
And
be first. So
yeah.
that's kind of the idea is that you can
Well,
only
it's a narrow
send
beach. Like
narrow beach. You can
yeah.
only send one battalion at a time. So yeah, it's a great scene. It's a great fight, but man, is
Oh my
it's
god,
depressing.
it is brutal, and there's guys being just blown to hell and shot in the face, and they wind up as night comes. They are braced against the outer embankment
Hmm.
of the fort, and the Confederates are literally just shooting them like fish in a barrel. Like they are just leaning out the top of the fort and just
Yeah,
throwing.
literally they put a cannon like
Yeah,
at the top of the dune, angle it
and they're just
down.
scraping the top off, guys.
Just yeah,
And they're
it's
throwing the Civil War version of hand grenades, those fuses that were in their hand, which
yeah.
existed.
It looked like TNT.
Yeah, well, it's literally just an iron casing filled with gunpowder and like shards.
Yeah.
It's a pipe bomb. It's an 1860s pipe bomb, and you light it and you check it. And they had them, and they used them during sieges, and they would have used them exactly like that. You just wait till they're close and yeet them.
So yeah, so everybody dies. There's just
Pretty much,
they make it inside the fort, like
yeah.
Forbes and
So Shaw grabs. They're pinned down, right, and they're all starting to panic because you're pinned, and you can't move backwards because there's 3,000 or so
well, you
Union
just get
soldiers
shot
in your
as you're
back.
running
And you
away.
can't move forward. And so Shaw grabs the flag, and runs up with the flag carrier. The flag carrier gets shot. Shaw grabs it and yells 54th and just gets mowed down. And so they all see it, and then Tripp grabs the flag. The guy who explicitly
Mhm.
earlier in the movie said he would not grab the flag, and
Right.
he was not fighting for anybody but himself, grabs the flag and spurs on this charge. He gets shot down
Yeah.
as they charge, and then the rest of the regiment charges up and over the embankment and just starts going ape shit on the
Yeah.
Confederate. It's crazy.
And they make it inside, and
Yeah.
there's just too many waiting for them.
Well, they do the thing where they clear the ramparts, and you're like, oh hey, they might actually do it. And they turn a corner, and there are 3 cannons and about 300 Confederates waiting
Just
in the
waiting.
base of the fort for him.
Forbes's face in the
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean that
Oh, they
like,
all know they're dead.
and
Like,
it sucks because yeah, like you said, you think they're from like they say it from the very beginning. They know they're gonna die,
oh yeah,
but they give you hope right there at the end. They're like, oh
yeah.
shit, they're
Well,
inside.
because they rallied.
They made
and
it.
and it's
They're
that
in.
they're killing the Confederates, and the Confederates are falling back. And you're like, oh
Right.
yeah, here we go. And
Here we
they have
go.
the Union Army at their back, and you're like, okay, well most of them will probably die, but the Union will take the fort.
Right.
And then it doesn't.
And then they're just like, that hope it got shot with a cannon or by a
Yeah,
cannon.
and
It's
then,
bad.
And then the cannon smoke clears, and you literally get to see Robert Shaw's body thrown into a pit. With
Just a
the rest
big
of the
old
soldiers.
trench.
Yep.
All the 54th kind of
Yep.
buried together.
Yep.
So, according to the end of the like kind of end credits of the movie, it talks
Mhm.
about it says over half died. The fort was never taken,
Nope.
which is a super like why I didn't need to know that. That's
Right.
super depressing.
That hurts my feelings.
Yeah, like I don't feel like that was necessary to put in there. But then that Congress authorized the raising of black troops throughout the Union, leading to 180,000 volunteers.
that is a true number. There were about 1 out of 10 of the Union Army ended up being African American soldiers.
Wow.
Now that being said, I think it's a little extra to claim that the Battle of Fort Wagner inspired. Like Congress was ready, right? Like they were like, okay,
Mhm.
these guys are because they're not the only regiment that
Right.
exists at that point. They're ready. I think it helped for sure, and
It's gotta be
if
an
nothing
inspirational.
else, it showed that like black soldiers can fight
Mhm.
and will fight.
Uh,
But yeah, oh my god, it's so you don't really expect like a movie about the Civil War, the combat to feel as intense as like modern combat, but
mhm.
in that fort, it does because it is like point blank gunfire and hand to hand fighting.
It is intense. It's great. It's a great scene. Obviously just heartbreaking, but also a great scene. So this, whenever this happened, and the ending of this movie always brings out the pessimistic in me, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
did they send them first because they were the black soldiers?
Yeah, I know
Uh,
that in real life they were assigned to go first. That being
that's what I'm
said,
saying.
yeah,
That's kind
I
of
I will say though that that's it's a mixed bag because on the one hand you kind of think, oh, okay, well if anybody's gonna get shot, they're gonna send the black people because they're racist,
that's what
right?
I'm.
On
Yeah,
the flip side though, if you do take the fort, do you want the black regiment to get the glory for it?
but they knew the first battalion wouldn't take the
Well, I
fort.
think that yeah, but like if it doesn't matter the battalion that take. If you take the fort, it's going to be reported the 54th
Was
were
the
the first
first
in.
to.
It's the same reason there's another battle
Hmm.
a year later in Virginia called the Battle of the Crater, where, long story short, the last real Confederate army is backed up around the city of Richmond, or Petersburg, a suburb of Richmond. And in these crazy fortifications, and Robert E. Lee's like, I will stand here until I starve to death. So help me God. You are not going to destroy my army. And Grant, the Union general's like, I'm just going to blow a hole in it. And they do, and they train a black regiment to do it. And at the very last minute, Grant is like, this is going to work. And if it works, I don't want black soldiers on the front page. And he changes his mind and puts an untrained white regiment in there to do it, and it fails. So that's why I don't really know, is my point. Like,
That's
because there's
yeah.
examples of both thought mentalities.
So definitely the film is definitely going for this was super courageous and this was a triumph and this was something that, obviously we're talking about 150 plus years later.
Right, right.
But you gotta question, like, is this something that maybe wasn't something we should be bragging about as
Yeah.
for the Union Army to be like, oh yeah, we were super progressive. We sent a
Right.
bunch of
We said,
sent a bunch of black soldiers to their death. That's not great.
no,
That's
I think it's I don't think it's something that like the US military should be proud of, but I think
yeah.
it's something that like African Americans, and especially African American like veterans and
Mhm.
legacies of those men, should be very, very proud.
Yeah.
Because you were willing to go head first in an army that you knew did not respect you and like didn't want you there, and a country that at most was like passively against your existence.
So to kind of try to bring it back to a positive note, at
Right.
the last visual is Shaw and Tripp
Mm-hmm.
laying dead bodies laying one on top of the other in the
Yep.
same trench, and I think that's very symbolic of we both,
Yeah.
because earlier we were talking about that Confederate proclamation. They
Yeah.
knew this was win or die.
Oh yeah.
They didn't win.
No.
They
They
but
died.
they died together
Yep.
for the same
And that
cause.
actually happened. Robert Shaw's body was actually buried with his men in a
Mhm.
trench grave, and the Confederates admitted to it because the practice was if you're an enlisted guy, you get buried wherever you get buried. But
Mhm.
if you're an officer, they send you home. If you're a commissioned officer, because it's the rules of war, and it's warfare is pretty classist back then. So if you're an officer, you're probably wealthy, and it's I would want my wealthy son sent back home, so I'll send him.
Mhm.
Well, they not only they strip him of his shoes and his uniform, and they throw him in this pit with all of his soldiers, and then they very proudly brag about it to the North, and they send his family a letter that say we buried your son with his worthless soldiers,
Wow.
basically. And his family wears that like a badge of honor
I was gonna
because
say,
they're
well,
like, damn
Shaw,
right you did.
yeah, Shaw
Like
probably would
he
have
would
wanted.
want nothing else.
Yeah,
Like
exactly. Okay.
yeah.
So there's the good and maybe the big picture
Hmm.
was not exactly as triumphant
Yep.
and uh well
Yeah.
intentioned as they want to make it seem, but Shaw's heart was in the right
Yeah,
place.
and shortly but the night before the battle, the soldiers are having like a revival
Mhm.
basically, and they're praying to God, and they know that like even if they're personally not going to die, that most of them are going to get shot.
Mhm.
And Rollins basically says, if tomorrow is the day that we die, God, just tell our families that we went down standing up, and they
That's a
do.
great
It
line.
is a great line, and he
Went
does,
went down
and the
standing
soldiers
up.
do.
Yeah,
Like
they all do.
yeah, it's brutal, and the fact that with the exception of the characters not named Robert Shaw being fictional and a couple of like timeline fluctuations,
Mhm.
most of that happened exactly how they say it.
Awesome.
The only big thing that didn't happen was that they were never deprived of supplies because they were the Massachusetts governor's personal project.
Gotcha.
So he wanted them to succeed. So that's the only thing in the movie that just absolutely didn't happen. And the timeline's a little weird because they're in the training camp over Christmas, but in reality, they didn't get there till like February of 1860.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's pretty like this is what happened to the 54th.
Not Braveheart.
No, it is not
This is
Braveheart.
not
It is
Braveheart.
pretty much the exact opposite of Braveheart.
Well, that is a great way for us to wrap this one up.
Yep.
I really like this. Let's
Yeah.
give it our ratings.
Okay.
I'll go first.
Yeah, give it the film rating.
I've given the last two 7 out of 10s.
Yeah, you're stingy. You're just giving them your GPA. Like, I don't know what you want.
I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10.
I want you to picture, no, before you say this, I want you to picture Matthew Broderick's face in that trench and everything he went through to give you this
I
movie.
know, it's
Okay.
sad. It makes me sad.
Yeah.
It makes me sad.
Yeah,
It's a powerful movie.
Yes.
I feel like I'm not even. I don't even know if I should say comparable because Braveheart had its very emotional.
Well, I mean, all the movies.
So did Gladiator.
I mean, objectively, all the movies that we have discussed are good movies.
Yes,
Like they just
without a
are.
doubt, without a doubt. This was the first one that was not considered one of IMDb's top 100 ranked films of all time.
Right.
I think it was like a 7 point something.
Yeah, it's like
on
dude,
there.
it's good. You know,
It's a good movie.
Yeah.
A little bit of I don't know.
It's 80s. It's a late 80s movie.
Yeah.
You know, like it's a little clunky, but it gets the job done.
I wanted to. I was trying to think of something else I would give it. I don't know if I want to get into decimals yet. So
Go for it.
I'm just gonna go 7, man.
Aw,
I know
man.
3 7s in a row, but
Well, historically, it's a 9, right?
Yeah.
Like I will confidently give it's a 9 because here's the thing: even though the 54th wasn't deprived of supplies, I have no doubt that there were black regiments that were. The pay thing was actually worse than in the movie. So in the movie, white soldiers make $13, the black soldiers get paid 10. In real life, white soldiers make $13, black soldiers get paid 7 because it's 10 and then 3 subtracted for their uniforms, and white soldiers' uniforms are comped by the military.
Sons of bitches.
And they fought for 18 months without receiving pay. So Colonel Shaw and his men died in Fort Wagner without a paycheck. To show you just how committed these guys were.
Not cool.
It's not a good look for like the Union.
Yikes.
But it's a great look for them. And his successor actually was the one who got them equal pay because he used the Battle of Fort Wagner. He goes, these men are fighting and dying for no money because you will not pay them equal wages.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. Wait. So 9 out of 10.
9 out of 10 history.
Historically, what do you say for personal?
I'm gonna give it. I think I've given like. You know what? I'm gonna give it an 8.5.
8.5. Oh, he's breaking out
8.5. And the reason
already.
I give it an 8.5 for personal is because it is a movie with star power that does not rely solely on its star power.
It doesn't.
Like you could.
Damn, does it benefit
helps,
from it?
But you could have cast anybody in those roles,
right?
And had like a 6 out of 10 movie.
It's man, I can't see anyone else's Private
Well,
Trip.
I can't either, but that's not my point. My point
and
is
Rollins. I can't see anybody other than.
It's written well enough and it is directed well enough that it would be an okay movie with absolutely no one in it.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's kind of like Gladiator in that way. It's the difference between Gladiator and Braveheart. Braveheart is good because the actors are really, really good.
Braveheart needed
the actors, Mel Gibson and the actors that he chose.
Specifically Mel Gibson in that role.
Yeah. Gladiator did not need Russell Crowe or Joaquin Phoenix to make it a good movie, but having them made it a really good movie. And that's how I feel about Glory. Is it would have been a pretty good movie with any like decent Hollywood actor, but the fact that they brought the heat just added to it.
Bring it. Like the racist soldier at the end of the movie as they're marching towards Fort Wagner says,
"Give them hell, 54th."
Give them hell, 54th.
Which is such a nice little.
Man,
you're like, oh, racism is over.
Gave me chills. Gave me chills. I was like, we live in a perfect world.
Our little
now.
Wonder Bread white hearts were like, good. He learned the error of his ways.
Yes,
and then you just know that he
longer...
went and like punched a black soldier in the face later. Like you just know that he did.
He's like, well, they're gone. I can give him this.
That's cool. I think he was like, give him hell 54th, so I don't have to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you want first? Okay.
The less of you that come back, the happier I'll be.
Well, you never know. Maybe he did learn the error of his ways. Maybe he became a great.
Statistically, he probably died of like typhus.
Yeah, he was probably dead 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
So, all right. Next episode.
I don't know. What do we?
Well, we talked about doing Oppenheimer.
We could do Oppenheimer. That's a modern movie.
Yeah, we did 2000s, 90s, 80s.
Hey, it's not our fault that the 2010s saw a sharp decline in quality films. Okay, like we can't help that, right?
Yeah, but Oppenheimer.
Yeah, Oppenheimer
Maybe
is
next?
maybe, yeah.
Well, I guess you'll find out.
Yeah,
Click
you'll
on the
find
next
out next week.
episode.
We'll go. I don't know. Oppenheimer's long, and you're about to have a kid, so
Yeah,
I mean,
that'll be fun.
that could go one of two ways.
I can watch it like I can break it up into fifths.
much
30 minutes at a time.
Much like everything else in the movie we just discussed, that could go one of two ways.
No kidding.
So we'll say Oppenheimer. We will like slightly commit to Oppenheimer, and I guess you'll find out next week when you tune in. So
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening.
don't go storming any sandy forts, guys. It doesn't work out.
It doesn't work out very well. All right. Have a good one.
Peace.